private tutor and his parents, he attended many Parisian salons, which are basically house parties or house shows where artists and musicians, poets, writers would get together and share their art and talk about what's going on. So at a young age, around 16, he had exposure to the arts, music, and literature. To the request of his parents, in 1875, he attended law school. He did complete his law degree, he was sworn in, and then he never practiced law. He decided to pursue his passion in music. So in 1879, he started attending classes at the Paris Conservatoire. The first teacher he studied with was Jules Massenet, and then he studied with César Franck, which was his exclusive teacher at the time of the Conservatoire. In 1886, he became the secretary of the Société Nationale de Musique, and there, again, he was part of the Parisian intellectual circles, artistic circles, and had a very close connection with all artists in Paris at the time. Sadly, in 1899, he suffered a fatal bicycle accident. There are a lot of different anecdotes about his death, but it is said that he was riding his bike downhill, crashed into a brick wall, and died on impact. And this is very sad, of course. Something that's interesting is he was very pessimistic and kind of a melancholy person, as a lot of French composers were. And so some people think it might be a suicide, but there's no way to know. But he also did write in a letter to one of his friends that he thought he would die early on in his life. So maybe he knew. But the great thing is that we have a lot of beautiful music by him. Next slide. So a little bit about his influences, style, and output. Of course, César Franck, his teacher. From Franck, he gets emotional density, high chromaticism. From Massenet, luscious and elegant melodies. And from Debussy, who he was friends with, this impressionistic style. And then, of course, he was influenced by Wagner. This time in Europe, Wagner was blowing up in the late 19th century. There was a whole movement of French Wagnerism. And one thing I want to focus on from Wagner that he uses is interior monologue. So he uses the orchestra to evoke the emotions and display the emotions of the speaker, where they might say what's going on, but they don't say what they're feeling, and that's left to the orchestra. I really love this quote. It kind of summarizes his style. In his brief life, Chausson brought the French chanson forward out of the romanticism found in composers such as Massenet and Franck, and closer to the more introspective world found in Debussy's work. And of course, he was very famous for his mélodie. And this genre employed a very deliberate and close relationship between text and melody, expressed with concision and clarity, which we will see in his Poème de l'amour et de la mer. A little bit about his output, 3 periods. His early period focused on elegant melodies and harmonies, highly influenced by Wagner. He went to Beirut and attended most of Wagner's operas. He even took his wife, they got married in 1883, he took his wife to Recital for their honeymoon, which is kind of funny. I would really enjoy that, but I don't know that every spouse would. In 1886 is when his second period began. This period became more dramatic and intense. He set some sacred works and also incidental music for theater and puppetry plays. Of course, Poème de l'amour et de la mer was composed over a 10-year period, 1882 to 1892, and he composed his first and only opera, Le Roi Artus, which he also wrote the libretto for. So he wrote all the words and the music, which just shows how much he really cared about this connection between music and text. He also wrote his one and only symphony in B flat in 1890. His third period is marked by the death of his father in 1894. For these last 5 years of his life, he wanted to cleanse all the external influences from teachers and find his own voice and style. He wrote in a letter to one of his friends that he wanted to de-Wagnerize his music. So he was well aware that Wagner had this huge influence on him, and he wanted to find his own voice. Next slide. And then, of course, he hosted his own salon at his house at 22 Boulevard de Bruxelles. There he had connections with musicians, artists, poets, writers, and he was very in touch with the trends of the artistic movement at that time. Some composers that he was close with and that attended were Vincent d'Indy, Henri Dupart, Claude Debussy, and Gabriel Fauré. Poets, Maurice Bouchard, which I'll talk about him in a little bit, Verlaine, Baudelaire, Maeterlinck, and some artists and painters, Monet, Manet, and Edgar Degas. He also had a large collection of paintings as well. Okay, next slide. So a little bit about the poet who wrote the poetry for this piece. He was also born in 1855. Him and Chausson were the same age. They were very close. He was a symbolist, poet, and playwright, and he had a great interest in music. He started the group Les Vivants, or The Living. It's an artistic and literary group that, through puppetry, wanted to revive the ancient Greek and Latin texts, Spanish Renaissance, and 16th century English song. He also founded with Les Vivants the Petit Théâtre du Marionette, and this was a puppetry theater, which was really fascinating to me. I did not think I would be reading the encyclopedia of puppetry, but it was really fascinating. Check it out if you're interested. He actually even sculpted his own puppets and put on his own puppet shows. He wrote a lot of sacred dramas for the puppet theater, which was an interesting thing at the time, setting like the legend of St. Cecilia and the devotion of St. Andrew. It wasn't always normal to stage sacred works, so this was very interesting. And then, of course, the work that the poetry for the piece I'll be singing today is taken from his Les Poèmes de l'amour et de la mer, written in 1876, and I was really surprised to find that this was actually a book of about 300 pages of poetry. And I was sifting through and trying to find, oh, this part came from, but it was all kind of taken from all over the place, and I had to sift through to kind of find where, which was very fascinating to me. And I wasn't able to find any specific information about who created the text for the piece, if it was Chausson and he took out pieces he liked, or Bouchard, or if they worked together. And I kind of would like to think that they worked together, they were close, they worked together, they probably compiled this specific poetry for this piece together. Next. So I want to talk about the symbolist movement a little bit. Of course, Maurice Bouchard was a symbolist poet. So symbolist artists sought to express individual emotional experience through the subtle and suggestive use of highly symbolized language. This next quote is from the Encyclopedia of Puppetry, and it's perfect. For the symbolist, the theater was a revelation, a mirror not of reality, but of the soul. In appealing to the spectator's imagination and through dematerialized scenic means, or puppetry, they wanted to evoke, not describe, create synesthesia, not represent. So keep that in mind as you're listening today. Some more themes covered in the symbolist movement were spirituality, imagination, dreams, and of course the metaphor between nature and human condition. I chose this piece, painting by George Frederick Watts, called Hope from 1886. It really struck me. The title is Hope, but your first instinct when you see it isn't hopeful. It's dreary, the colors are muted, the subject is, kind of crumpled over, and she's blindfolded. She is playing a lyre, but there's only one string. And I think that's just the perfect symbolization of hope. When you're in this dark, drab, you feel like you have nothing left, but you have one string. And then I think also what she's on Could be a rock in the sea, which would fit perfectly with the piece today, or it could be the globe, could be the earth, and maybe this subject represents humanity. So keep that in mind as you listen today. So that brings us to Poème de l'amour et de la mer, Chausson's Opus 19, composed between 1882 and 1892. It's in 3 movements. La fleur des eaux is the first movement, the flower of the waters. There's a instrumental interlude, second movement, and the third movement is la mort de l'amour, or the death of love. So already we can see this metaphor coming to life, this parallelism between the flower of the water's nature and the death of love, which is human experience. So there's 2 ways to interpret this. It could be a love song, a love story about this discovery of love, basically a really great breakup song. And I would like to, I interpret it in a different way. One of the things I forgot to mention about the puppetry is that puppets were seen as a sacred symbol, which I had no idea, this just blew my mind. And specifically the marionette, the string attached, is seen as the symbol of the connection to the divine and the creator. So that's kind of inspired me in my interpretation of this piece. And maybe it's the death experience of the speaker and coming in contact with the creator and not wanting to leave their body quite yet. So it's really about the human experience of death, grief, and separation of the soul and the body. So I want to read through all of the poetry. There's a lot, hopefully you have a handout, but it's such a gorgeous story, and I really want you guys to have that in mind as I sing. That's it. La fleur des eaux. The air is filled with an exquisite scent of lilacs, which, flowering to the heights of the walls below, perfume the woman's hair. The sea, in the heat of the sun, is all aflame, and over the fine sands which they kiss roll the sparkling waves. Oh, sky that mirrors the color of her eyes, breezes that will sing among the lilacs in bloom, only to emerge all saturated with perfume. Streams that will moisten her dress. Oh, green paths, you who will tremble beneath her dear little feet. Let me see my beloved. And my heart awoke on this summer morn, for a lovely child stood on the shore, allowing her vibrant eyes to wander over me, and she smiled at me tenderly and wildly. You, whom youth and love have transfigured, you appeared to me then like the soul of all things. My heart flew towards you, you took it without return, and from the open sky, roses rained upon us. What a lamentable and savage sound that rings the hour of farewell. The sea rolls along the shore, mocking and caring little that it is the hour of farewell. Birds pass with open wings over the abyss, almost joyfully. In the heat of the sun, the sea is green, and I bleed silently as I watch the sky in all its brilliance. I bleed, thinking of my life that will vanish in the waves. My very soul has been taken from me, and the somber roar of the waves covers the sound of my sobs. Who knows if this cruel sea will bring her back to my heart? My gaze is fixed upon her. The sea sings, and the mocking wind jeers at the anguish of my heart. The third movement, L'amour de l'amour. Soon that blue and joyful island will appear to me among the rocks. That island on the silent water will float like a water lily. Across the sea of amethyst, gently the boat glides, and I shall be both happy and sad to remember so much so soon. The wind tossed about the dead leaves. My thoughts, too, were tossed like the dead leaves in the night. Never under the dark sky had they shone so sweetly the 1,000 golden roses from which the dew was falling. A frightening dance, and the crumpled leaves, which gave forth a metallic sound, were waltzing, seeming to sigh under the stars and to speak the inexpressible horrors of lost love. The large silvery beaches, caressed by the moon, were ghosts. As for me, all my blood froze when I saw my beloved so strangely smiling. Like the faces of the dead, our faces had paled, and speechless, bending over her, I could read the fatal word in her eyes, oblivion. The time of the lilacs and the time of the roses will not return to this spring. The time of the lilacs and the roses is past, the time of the carnations too. The wind has changed, the skies are morose, and we shall never again run and gather the blooming lilacs and beautiful roses. The spring is sad and cannot bloom. Oh, joyful and sweet spring of the year, which came last year to steep us in its sunlight. Our flower of love has so much faded, alas, that your kiss cannot awaken it. And you, what are you doing? No blooming flowers, no bright sun or cool shade. The time of the lilacs and the time of roses, with our love, is dead forever. So just some general musical characteristics, and then I'll talk about each section of poetry and their musical characteristics. You'll see that Chausson changes the accompaniment and the orchestration to create a musical form that complements and emphasizes the poetry. There's a ton of chromaticism and modulation, a lot of meter mixture. It is through compose. There's one section that does repeat, which I'll talk about. There's this impressionistic style contrasted with broad musical statements, and there are a lot of interludes in between these sections of poetry where I put a little asterisk. And I have my own interpretation and kind of how we get from each poetic event to the next within these interludes, but I want you all as the audience to take that in and see how the poetry inspires you and see where the music takes you and what is evoked for you. And then, of course, lots of themes and motives to kind of tie the piece together in a unified work. Next. So the first theme you will hear in the first movement, it repeats about 10 times before the voice enters on the same theme. So you will know that theme, and it continues to come through throughout that first movement. The second theme is introduced in the interlude. It's a very somber, thoughtful, pensive D minor theme, and this comes back at the end of the third movement. Next slide. And then the final theme or motive that Chausson uses is this minor second da da da, and it's kind of hard to see, but I tried to show quel son lamentable et sauvage, how lamentable and savage is the sound. Before je saigne, I bleed, it happens again, and even on couvre le bruit, covers the sound of my sobs, the voice gets to sing that minor second motive, and then it happens again many times, but here 2 times in the third movement, it's actually the same exact thing. So this minor second motive happens when the poetry is becoming more dark, somber, intense, kind of warped. So it's kind of a heads up to like, oh, this is a shift. Yeah, slide. Okay, so the first section of the poetry, and you can kind of follow along with your translations there, is in G major. We hear theme 1, of course. There's some meter mixture, which kind of gives this unstable and very mystical vibe. It's marked calme, it's very calm and serene. Here we see the accompaniment texture changes. So for the air, we have theme 1. For la mer, the sea, there's a whole new texture. And au ciel, there's a whole new texture. So each natural element gets specific music. In this section, descriptive language grows and intensifies until the first declamatory statement of the poetry, the first use of first person, let me see my beloved. And this is emphasized in the way that Chausson sets the music, and you'll see. So the event that happens in this section for me is the discovery, the beauty of nature. So if it was a love story, maybe seeing your love and it's beautiful and the air is full of scent of lilacs. The way I'm interpreting it is discovering the sacred aspects of nature and the divinity and wanting to see your creator. The second section, Emoka and My Heart Awoke, is in B major, 6/4 meter. It's a very different section. It's bookended by pulsing triads, and it's marked simplement, simply, which I think symbolizes this beautiful child that appears on the shore. There's a lot more passive language in this section. My heart awoke, letting her eyes wander over me. You appeared to me. My heart flew towards you. So there's not a lot of like, I am feeling this way. There's not that first person connection. So this section is the reveal when the subject meets their loved one or their creator. Next slide. This third section in the first movement, Son lamentable et sauvage, is the hour of farewell, as is stated in the poetry. There's a huge shift here. We're in G minor. First time we're really in a minor key. Très lent is very slow. We hear this minor second motive. And the poetry becomes more intense, dramatic. There's more use of first person in the second section. And you'll see that the music reflects how the subject is perceiving nature. And things start to change a little bit. Next slide. So then we have the second movement, interlude. It's kind of like a breath of fresh air after this long first movement. It's in D minor, marked lent et triste, slow and sad. We hear this second theme. And it's almost like a premonition of the final farewell that happens at the very end of the entire piece, which sometimes is extracted as le temps de la. So next slide. So l'amour de l'amour begins quite happy, and it's a little strange because something sad just happened, and all of a sudden we're in E major, 3/8, fast tempo, lively and joyful, and we're back to this beautiful and picturesque nature scenery of the island and the rocks and the water, lilies and everything. So this section is the denial, is ignorance is bliss. Like this happened, but I'm just gonna keep on pretending that I'm just in nature and everything's good. Okay, next slide. This second section, the wind tossed about the dead leaves. We're back to reality. C minor, it's marked slow and solemn. We hear this minor second motive again, the da-da-da. And the subject's view of the nature has changed. So it's a lot darker. Nature is kind of perverted and warped through the subject's eyes, and it's almost violent. We can also see in the very first movement, there's a lot of talk about the sun and the warmth of the sun, and now it's about the dark sky and the dead leaves and stars. So everything's a little bit darker. Next slide. The final section and final part of the entire piece, which is sometimes extracted as its own standalone piece. We hear this D minor theme that is introduced in the interlude. Again, it's marked slow and sad. And this is the only music material that is repeated, and to me that brings this sense of returning home and this moment of rest. So this last section is the final farewell. We had the hour of farewell, and now this is the acceptance of either the breakup or the death experience and realizing, I'm dead. I have to accept this, Okay, next slide. So this piece is very sad. It ends with our love is dead forever. And it's kind of depressing. But it's so beautiful, and so in conclusion, Chausson uses musical themes and textures to develop the images evoked by the poetry, which portray the human experience of loss through the lens of nature. And we can connect this experience and the emotions and the feelings through how the nature is depicted, and then how Chausson shows that through the music and creates this synesthetic experience. And to talk about nature a little bit more, of course, we can find hope in the fact that nature has cycles. So winter, everything dies, and then it comes back in the spring. Unfortunately, in this piece, it says the spring will not come back, will not bloom, it's dead forever. But I had a conversation with somebody recently about this, and we don't know what's on the other side of death. And I think in that lies our hope, the fact that we don't know. Because if we knew, what would there be to look forward to? And then in the case of Chausson's life, he died at a very young age, but we have his music, and he lives on through his music. So just like this piece, he died, and he's dead, but his life and his soul lives on, and there's something after. So I hope today that within grief, and I know it's been a hard couple of years for everybody, we can find hope through creation and art and music. Thank you.